I think everybody should have a will because then you can provide exactly how you want your property to be dealt with. Otherwise, the provisions of the Administration Act take over, and that may not be necessarily what you want. I think at one time trusts went completely retail. At your dinner party, you're talking about your trust, so maybe I should have one too. I notarized quite a lot of documents where people were buying properties in the United States for under 30,000 US.
In mid-2020, he wrote a loan for $1 million interest only, and it was $500 a week was the repayments to borrow $1 million.
Like any other commodity, it goes up and it goes down. The good thing about Earth is that they're not making any more about it.
Welcome back, guys, to our next episode of the Blueprint Podcast. I'm back here with Rory again, and we're really grateful to be joined by Arthur Loo from the prestigious law firm Loo Koo Solicitors. He's a titan of the legal industry. He's been around for 30 years, and we're lucky enough to have him as our neighbour. So we see him all the time up and down the hallway and talk shop a bit. But Arthur, thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we know you're a very busy man, so we appreciate you taking some time. Like I mentioned before we started, this podcast is mainly for, our existing clients, potential clients, and our referral partners. So, you've got a really good base of knowledge on all things legal. Obviously, property would be quite aligned with what we do. But just as a business owner as well, we really want to get the best out of you. And then 40 minutes we've got you and really understand where you've come from to build, such a formidable business. I'll just kick off with, how did you actually end up starting Loo Koo 30 years ago?
Right. I'd been practicing law in a Queen Street law firm. Yeah. And at the time, there was a lot of Chinese immigration or immigration generally from Hong Kong, Taiwan, a little bit from China, Southeast Asia.
Yep.
And being able to deal with clients appropriately culturally was starting to be a bit of an issue. So I was in a regular New Zealand firm. The receptionist was Caucasian. Everybody else was, with the exception of my secretary, was not Chinese. People ringing up even would find it difficult to get past. The receptionist wouldn't even leave a message, and they would ring me at all hours of the day and night at home. One night my wife took 13 calls while she was trying to cook dinner. And, I got a really warm reception when I got home. And people would ring the days before mobile phones.
Yeah.
So
they had no
ring up, where's Arthur? He's at the office now. Call the office. He's not there. Is it just possible he might be driving home? That was the sort of that side of things. But really, I recognized that there was going to be a need for people to be able to communicate with clients in their language in a culturally appropriate way.
Absolutely.
And so Ken Koo was somebody who had worked for me, but at that time he was at another law firm. And Christmas 1995, he rings up and says, Arthur, I'm coming over for a cup of coffee. And I knew what he wanted to talk about. So we had a chat, and we said, it's really about time we started a law firm where we could communicate with our clients in their own language and deal with them in a culturally appropriate way. And so I resigned from my partnership. I'd been there 15 years, so I've been practicing law 48 years now.
Yep.
And Ken left his firm and we set up Loo Koo here at 8 Madakau Road. The location is great. One Sunday afternoon, we were driving around looking for office space, and I saw the to lease sign outside here, and but was the whole floor, 4,000 square feet. And I rang up Ken and said, look, the space is perfect, the location is perfect, but man, we're looking for about 2,500 square feet.
Yeah.
And this is this big space and, big commitment.
Yeah.
But we said, look, let's go for it. We took the whole space, sublet some, and then over the years, we've sort of expanded into the whole floor and then taken a portion of the floor next door.
Yeah.
So we're now probably about 5,300 square feet. And it's been a great journey. We started with about 8 or 9 people in the office. We've now got 30.
Yeah.
From 2 partners to 4 partners, and, a great staff. We've got very, I think, capable and loyal staff. So it's been, very rewarding. It's been very gratifying.
Absolutely.
That's brilliant.
So we act for a lot of people. I mean, obviously for New Zealanders and English speakers as well.
Brilliant. You obviously saw that opportunity with, the influx of migration happening. How big was the opportunity at that time? And then how has it grown, I suppose, in 3 decades of business?
Pretty good. I mean, I can speak Cantonese and passable English, and my partner Ken spoke Mandarin as well.
Yeah.
And then we had people in the office who could speak, Cantonese and Mandarin. So, that attracted a lot of clients. And obviously, if you don't speak English perfectly, having somebody who could deal with you in Chinese was, a great boon for business.
Yeah.
And then to be able to deal with them, like I say, in a culturally appropriate way, because you know how, for example, Chinese or Cantonese especially are a bit suspicious about numbers.
Yeah.
And so we decided to code our files. Okay. So the coding system was the first 3 letters of the surname and then 6 or 5 numerals. Okay. And so we go 1 for English speakers, starting with 1. 8, how Cantonese people.
Lucky number 8.
So for example, Mr. Chan would be CHA 8 something. And so they all got 8 in their client number. Okay?
And you probably just got business just because of that.
And for the Taiwanese, I think it was 6.
Yeah.
So 6 is still a good number. And for the mainland Chinese was 3 and so on. Tahitians got 9, Koreans got 5. Yeah. That also let us know immediately what their preferred language was.
Yeah.
So we picked up a file that had 8 in it. Well, we knew that they spoke Cantonese. A 6 in it, we knew they spoke Mandarin.
Yeah.
It's amazing, eh? And I mean, 30 years in business is no mean feat. Dan and I were talking before we started this episode and about you coming in. He turned 30 in February this year. So while you guys were launching Loo Koo, he was running around in nappies as a wee
crapping myself.
Yeah.
Excuse my language once again.
And then further to, like Blueprint, we're in our 2nd year of business. So it's something to aspire to. As a bit of a journeyman of the law, you must have seen some changes over 30 years and the good, the bad and the ugly. So
lots. I mean, the way we go about practicing, the practical side of things. Telling some of the young people one time, I said to a young secretary, we used to stick carbon paper between several sheets of paper and an impact typewriter. Copies came because
so you could do a secondary.
Carbon, 2 or 3 copies.
Yeah.
Right? Fax machines have come and gone in one generation.
Yeah.
Right?
Almost less than that.
Emails now. I mean, who posts a letter anymore?
Yeah.
When I was young and we were practicing, we used to actually pick up a file and go and see the other lawyer when we settled on, did a property settlement. We'd pick up a bank check and actually go to where the title deed was.
Is that true?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, I would typically say on a Friday.
Yeah.
To
go and update the title.
Not to update the title, but like if I was buying a property from you, you had the title there or your discharge mortgage.
Yeah.
I was buying from you, so I'd have to get a bank check to pay you.
Yeah.
Right? But the only way to do that was to get a bank check from the bank, walk down to your office, okay,
and hand it to you.
And hand the check over.
Yeah.
And you handed me the transfer and the title to me. And then I would take it back to the office and give it to the registration clerk to take it to the land titles office to register.
To update it, yeah.
Things like that. But what was good about that was that I got to meet you, to talk to you, see the cut of your cloth. And, if there was some rapport, the next time we had a dealing, we used to exchange undertakings that I'll do this if, I'll just undertake that the water rates are paid or the land rates are paid and things like that.
Yeah.
Or sometimes if we had an issue, I'd bring you up and say, look, Dan, let's sort this out. You tell your client A and I'll tell my client B and we'll get it done, get it sorted, which is good for the clients, good for the profession.
Yeah.
And now we don't get to meet the person face to face.
Yeah.
You tend to or stand back and write turgid letters to each other.
Yeah.
And it becomes a little bit harder, I think, to resolve issues. There's so many more lawyers now and we are a bit more, maybe not suspicious, but we don't have that camaraderie. Because, I trust you, you trust me. Okay. And let's get it sorted for the benefit of the client.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I suppose once you've got that face-to-face relationship, there's that sort of mutual respect, that acknowledgement of each other's efforts and understanding that.
I mean, if I had not met you, it becomes a bit harder. Even if I pick up the phone and call you, right, it becomes a bit harder to do because I think, face-to-face is good. I mean, I hate acting for clients who I've never met before. Quite often people email me and we do it over the telephone. But, sometimes if issues arise, it becomes harder to resolve.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially if you're mostly limited to emails, I find, because emails can be quite cold.
Yeah, but
Regardless of if you put warm regards, they'll still be a bit cold,
it's just a bit impersonal.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to strike the tone. And sometimes if you're conversing, it's easier to inject or to elaborate, or just to maybe easier to explain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I just want to take a quick step back to where we sort of started about your business journey, because we have a lot of viewers, Arthur, who are, business owners, and also, our referral partners who are running their own sort of consultancy businesses and trying to grow them. Obviously, you guys started with just yourself and Loo Koo, and then you built to the point where you've got 20 staff now, or more than 20 staff. What advice do you have for someone who's trying to grow a business, take the risk to hire people, I suppose, in the current market? Like, what should you be thinking about? What numbers are important before you consider hiring someone?
Well, to have confidence in what you're doing.
Yeah.
Okay. You've got to back yourself. You've got to be genuine. I think you've got to be nice, treat people right.
Yeah.
Right. And then obviously, that will attract work.
Yeah.
Right. I think in professional services, you've got to like the other person. I think, to have some warmth or a trust in them.
Yes.
Right. And so if you come across as being genuine, being sincere, people will gravitate towards you. I think having a bit of a sense of humor helps.
Yeah.
So that, because, why would you go to somebody who is a cold fish?
Yeah.
Right. Because you expect most professional to be able to do the job. Right. And so then it comes down to the client advisor interface.
Yes.
In your dealings.
Yeah.
Right. It's got to be pleasant and warm. And obviously you've got to do the job.
Yeah.
But, if you go to somebody who was an absolute cold fish and there was no warmth to the relationship, I mean,
what's the point?
Why? Generally, we want to be happy. We want to have all our relationships to be pleasant, right?
100%.
And if you're in professional services where it's so important, and, it's a privilege to be in a position like mine where 3 minutes or less after meeting somebody, they're telling you their most intimate details sometimes about their lives, and then reposing their faith in you to do the right thing by them.
Yeah, it's an absolute privilege to have that, because we experience the same thing with our clients. Straight away we're talking about their financial position, which is extremely delicate, so you're grateful for that. And a lot of it comes with just being a good service person and being warm, right? Yeah.
And then working hard. I mean, it's, the old truism about, the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, with things having changed so much over your tenure, something that we talk about often with our clients, we have dealings with your team when we refer clients as well, is ownership structures, right? You got trusts, you got super trusts, you got hidden trusts, all these different ways that you can own sort of your assets. Do you think, as time's gone on, the requirement need for trust is all those sorts of different unique structures is higher than ever? Or do you think with, as things has developed, some of those structures have become a bit outdated?
I don't think they've become outdated. There's always a need for them.
Yes.
It's really appropriateness.
That's right.
I think at one time trusts went completely retail and everybody wanted to have one because,
they were fashionable.
At your dinner party, you're talking about your trust. So maybe I should have one too. A lot of people, I think, set up a trust when there wasn't the need for it. I mean, they weren't in a risky business. They weren't in an occupation that was risky, but a trust is largely about asset management and asset protection. So there may be many reasons why one would have a trust, like, if you had a handicapped family member that you wanted to provide for, that sort of thing. But quite often, I think you can do other things to manage to do asset planning, or through a well-prepared will for a lot of people. I always say that, don't set up structures that are overly complicated or structures that the person doesn't understand. Okay. I mean, a lot of people, I think, don't really understand, the structure of a trust. But if it's appropriate, by all means.
100%.
But, I wouldn't set up one
for the sake of it.
For the sake of doing it, because there's the administration costs, all that sort of thing. And, if it's just mum and dad with a house and they're both salary earners and the children are fine. Look, I have set up trusts for people where there's a handicapped child or something, and they set up a which is entirely appropriate.
Yeah.
But just to set up one because your best friend's got one.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily advocate that.
Yeah.
You mentioned wills as well, and obviously here we write insurance policies and life insurance policies, and sometimes that estate question gets brought to the fore. In your experience, what are the kind of pitfalls, I suppose, of people not having those estate plans in place? And have you got any examples of where things have gone awry, where it's left to kind of, I suppose, the default system that we've got versus people with structured plans?
Yeah, look, I think everybody should have a will because then you can provide exactly how you want your property to be dealt with. Otherwise, the provisions of the Administration Act take over, and that may not be necessarily what you want. A well-drafted will, even a simple one for, a mum and dad situation, it doesn't have to be elaborate, but if you don't have one, you've got to do a search to make sure that that person didn't have any more children, under the Status of Children Act. Then you've got to maybe advertise for wills so that the person who applies for letters of administration can say that they've made a diligent search to see whether the person left a will or not.
Wow.
And that leads to delay, and that adds more cost. And at a time when a person is invariably grieving, the delay and the extra costs, it's unnecessary for, compared with the relative cost of doing a simple will. Versus the inconvenience of having. And then sometimes, if there are more than one person who could apply for letters of administration, like say the second parent goes, and so there are 4 children, one of those children's got to apply, and the other 3 children have got to sign consents in favour of their sibling.
Yeah, right.
That all takes time.
Yeah.
And one thing that interests me and confuses me a little bit actually is a person can write a will, and then there's protections for certain people to challenge wills. I find that particularly confusing, and perhaps in some situations I get it, and in others I don't. Like I don't understand the somewhat lack of a freedom to designate a will.
Yeah, so spouses, children, and grandchildren, and have a right to challenge a will through the Family Protection Act.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's that tension between testamentary freedom and making sure that beneficiaries, next of kin, who have a expectation where the deceased might owe them a moral obligation to provide for them. You get instances where, say, a parent disinherits a child because for various family dynamics and all that sort of thing. So it's really trying to strike that right balance between testamentary freedom and making sure that a person who should be looked after, a person to whom the will maker owed a moral obligation, discharges that obligation, and if they don't do it in their will, it's done through the courts.
Yep.
Okay. Quite often, the settlement is usually negotiated before you get to a full-fledged court hearing, but that's another matter. But so sometimes parents may be mean, and they disinherit a child for reasons that are not entirely fair. So I guess there should be that ability to redress, and then there's also the Testamentary Promises Act, where a will maker or a person might say, well, if you come and look after me, live in my house and all that sort of thing, I can't pay you at the moment, but I'll make sure that you are looked after in my will, right? And then they don't discharge that obligation. And so that person to whom the promise is made should have the ability to make a claim.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I suppose like blended family scenarios could get quite complex as well, where you've got either spouse having children, from previous relationships and whatnot.
And that's where I think people should make a will, because you've got my children, your children, our children.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Well, moving around to something slightly different or back sort of towards the finance side of things, we deal a lot with property developers. I'm sure that yourself and the team do as well.
We do.
And it's been a pretty chaotic last 5 years with changes in obviously interest rates and the market. And we've had a lot of clients over the last couple of years who have been affected by the changes in values with pending off the plan purchases. I'm sure that's something that you've seen quite a bit of. And are you still having clients who have issues with their settlements with off the plan purchases, or are you recommending people avoid them at this point in time? What's sort of your view on that?
Well, with settlements, we just found that in the last wee while, most of our sales are settling.
Yeah.
Whereas last year, with some developments, quite a number were not settling.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is pleasing that, people are able to go through to complete the purchase.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Buying off the plan, yes and no. I think you need to look at who the developer is, look at their product.
Yep.
And to have some confidence that the finished product is good.
Yeah. Check out the track record.
Yeah. Well, you should be able to look at plans, interpret plans and specifications, and be able to look at storyboards of the fit out and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So if you can do that, I mean, some people, not everybody, can visualize, what the finished product might look like.
Yeah.
I think you've got to look at what the finished product might look like. At the moment, I think there's some developers are probably hurting. They're sitting on a lot of unsold stock.
For sure.
And you see, every now and again, there are ads for somebody who wants to sell the whole development.
Yeah.
Lock, stock and barrel. And so if somebody is well capitalized, if maybe they want to take a punt and buy the whole lot and sit on it and wait for better times.
Yeah.
But, then you've got the cost of holding.
Absolutely.
What do you do? Do you rent it out? And then when you rent it out and all of a sudden the property becomes secondhand.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. With that sort of being said in some of your circles and stuff, what do you have a general view of the future of the property market? It's been a winning horse forever. Do you think it continues on that same trajectory? Is the future got something different?
Commodity, like any other commodity, it goes up and it goes down. But the good thing about Earth is that they're not making any more about it.
Yeah,
making
for
more.
sure.
Arthur's hot take.
So look, the market will always be there.
Yeah.
And look, at times it will become more buoyant than at other times.
Yeah.
I mean, right at the moment, things are globally a little bit uncertain. But in New Zealand, in a way, we're reasonably well insulated. And I think the price fluctuations are not that huge.
Yeah.
Okay. We're overseas, like the Asian financial crisis, the global financial crisis, where prices were big, fluctuations, right? I mean, I saw, as a notary public, I notarized quite a lot of documents where people were buying, properties in the United States for under 30,000 US.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whereabouts?
Atlanta, Florida, Las Vegas, I seem to remember.
Incredible.
Some of them were buying properties, sight unseen.
Yeah.
Where people were just walking away from properties.
Yeah.
You have to go down to like Matauri in the South Island for anything close to that in New Zealand.
I still don't think you get that for a house. Yeah. But yeah, I completely agree with you guys. Auckland probably has got one of the most unique property markets in the world, having just looked around a bit and just followed it, obviously, for my tenure in the business. And just for the last couple of years, watching just some areas dipping, some not, some properties still going for crazy prices at auction, even though it's a slightly depressed market, So that's been really interesting to sort of watch. But I agree with you. I think just that constant pressure on supply is always going to flow through.
Look, a lot of what drives the property market is the cost of money.
Yeah.
Right? If interest rates go down,
the cost of borrowing.
Properties appreciate. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, when we saw a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, when interest rates were low, right? I mean, that was the greatest buoyancy in the market, right? I mean, prices went up 40 or 60% or something in a year.
Yeah.
So, it's the cost of funds, right? And that flows through to other areas like building costs and all that sort of thing. But I think if the cost of borrowing is low, that, I think, puts in a lot of confidence in the market.
Absolutely. I remember the lowest I ever got, I was sitting with my colleague in 2020, mid-2020, and he wrote a loan for $1 million interest only. And it was $500 a week was the repayments to borrow $1 million. It was just crazy. Just looking back, you surprised you didn't novel at the situation more compared to what a normal market looks like. Arthur, it's been really good to have you on. Before we wrap up, is there any other things that you important to mention? Obviously, we've referred a lot of clients to your business. We're super happy with the great work your team's done taking care of us.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that. It cuts both ways. So we hope, that we'll be able to send people up to you as well.
No, likewise.
Look, it's been quite an interesting journey but it's one of the great things is, dealing with people.
Yeah.
You deal with people in all walks of life, professional and from the client's point of view. And it's always a pleasure to deal with nice people.
That's right.
So you've done 30 years. How many years have you got left?
A few. I think I've still got a few years. I've been in practice 48 years. So I was with my previous practice for 15 years.
Yeah.
I'm not a danger to my clients yet.
We always ask a couple of quick fire questions that are non-business related when we wrap up. So we wrote these last week. I haven't read them since we wrote them, but I'm just going to fire them off.
Sure.
After a long day of setting up trusts and dealing with probates, what's your favorite go-to cuisine and what will you wash it down with?
Maybe Italian with a nice Pinot Noir or...
Yum.
Yeah.
Nice.
The Mediterranean diet.
Yeah.
Favorite music genre?
Oh, blimey. I'm an old fossil. Just any popular song where you can at least hear half the words or make out the lyrics.
No duff.
Somebody like Rod Stewart or something.
Oh, nice. Classics. Yeah. Cool. In terms of your journey with real estate, are you more, for personal investing, property flipping or long-term property holding?
I tend to hold. I'm not a flipper.
Not into flipping. Yeah.
No. Well, in years gone by, done up the odd property, with friends to sell, but that was long.
Just for fun, by the sounds of it.
It was just with a couple of mates and all that, and you go in and do up a home unit, and all that sort of thing.
So
nothing big.
So we buy the asset, hold it, let inflation devalue the debt. That's exactly what we preach to the clients.
Buy the asset, paint and wallpaper, and then sell as quickly as possible.
Yeah. But you prefer the holding. Perfect. Yeah. Just what we preach to our clients. What is, this is your question. You asked.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Dan. About to cut me off there. Wind back to 95. What advice would you give yourself, knowing what you know now, starting this journey you've been on with Loo Koo?
I was involved with a lot of charities, a lot of sort of community work, heading, chairing, all sorts of organisations, I've derived a lot of pleasure out of that. Half of me sort of says I should have been at the office working, but I don't know. I got a lot of pleasure out of doing it. I think my lucky stars, I was born in New Zealand and I've always wanted to give back to the community. But there were times when my partners or the people at the office were sort of, I guess, missing my presence at the office. And so it's a hard thing to balance. The balance. Half you want to say, I should have been at the office working, but now when I look back upon my life and the things that I've done, the experiences that I've had that money can't buy. I've been on all sorts of boards and all that sort of thing, done, trips to China with the Prime Minister, stuff like that. But I wouldn't have had the honour of doing those trips, if I wasn't involved in some of the things that I was involved in. So I've headed cancer charities that try to educate children and school-age children from abusing alcohol and drugs. And, I've headed sports clubs, I've headed my local community group, all that sort of thing. And it's
brilliant.
Taken a lot of time and a long-suffering wife. And, a very supportive wife. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
I'd like to think I haven't made too many mistakes business-wise.
Nice.
In terms of running the business. Cocking up files. Touch wood, it's not been any of those either.
Nice. Oh, that's cool. It sounds like you've done a lot of good, which is impressive.
So not too many regrets, but the advice maybe is be a bit more mindful of your time. Look,
it's juggling time, and so it's quite often it's been at the expense of family time. But you sort of somehow try to hold it all together,
make it work, and it has.
Having an understanding, supportive way
it's everything.
Makes a big difference.
So our last question was actually, because I think we were planning to do this before the OCR review, and it was your thoughts on if we were going to get an OCR cut, but it's obviously been announced today. that we got to cut?
Oh, yeah. Look, I think that was always on the cards.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to think. At the moment, the world is topsy-turvy. The OCR only has a little bit of influence on the cost of funds, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of our cost of funds depends on what is happening overseas, and if Treasury bills in the United States are commanding a high coupon, there'll be more money flowing that way, and invariably, I guess, it will increase the cost of funds for New Zealand borrowers,
Yes.
for people, for lending institutions, right? I mean, the banks, most of the money that they lend, a lot of it comes from overseas, right? Because New Zealanders are, we don't save like Japanese housewives, right?
Yeah, we're
so
price takers.
the banks have to source the money that they lend from overseas. And so if their cost of money is high, it gets passed on to the borrower in New Zealand. So over the next few years, it's wait and see, I guess. You just hang on to your hat and keep your fingers crossed.
Just pray. Yeah.
That's where you guys come in. If
That's
you
right.
structure, a loan and the borrowers are careful about what they do, they're informed about what they do, then hopefully they won't get into too much trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the banks do a lot of that legwork in the background with the stress testing and making sure lending's affordable. But obviously people's situations change all the time. So it's just making sure that you got a good financial plan. And yeah, exactly like you're saying.
Yeah, sound advice from, mortgage brokers. And some might want to push a client into something that is maybe a little bit unsafe. But, so long as you get sound advice and sound financial planning, they should be safe.
Absolutely. Arthur or Ian, any last questions? We're good, eh?
No, I think it's a nice chat, Arthur.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're very much a friend of Blueprint and
Great,
hope to have you on soon. Cheers.
Thank you.